Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lexie Smyth. I'm one of the campaign managers here at Barnes& Noble, and with me today is frontlist buyer Brenda Allison. We are so thrilled to be in conversation with Patrick Ryan, who is the author of our September book club selection, Buckeye. If you sent in questions via the Eventbrite, Brenda and I have them. You can also submit questions via the Q&A module, which Brenda and I will be moderating. And as a reminder, this is going to be a conversation with spoilers. So if you haven't finished the book, you can always come back later as this will be posted on the Barnes& Noble YouTube channel. So with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about the book. So, Patrick, one of the things that I found the most special about Buckeye is that it has both an evocative setting and a well-developed cast of characters. Can you talk a little bit about what element first inspired this story? Was it a place, a character, something else?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation. Um, the thing that inspired it, in part, was the setting, because I'd always been drawn to the setting of this small town in Ohio. My father grew up in a small town. His parents were raised in that same small town, and I grew up in Florida, but we would visit this place in Ohio as one of our big vacations for the year if we got to go each year. And I was really intrigued by how landlocked it was, how isolated it seemed to me. And then I found out long after almost everybody in my family had passed away that my dad's mom had maintained this affair in this tiny town for decades. So that was just something that stuck with me as a writer. And it wasn't that I had any interest in writing about her. I don't. I didn't have any interest in writing about a prolonged affair, or anything that I kind of twisted my family into to make fiction out of. But I try to pay attention to what I pay attention to. I try to notice what sticks in my head. And that dynamic of having something in your life with two families, with your family and a family that lives nearby, and the level of secrecy that would build, and the kind of things that you would keep from the people who meant the most to you, and all of what would be unshared over time as something like this grew. And I realized that I had this opportunity to tap into a big story that I had been wanting to write for a long time in a general kind of way, which was just about two families and how time would affect things like deception, revelation, confession, forgiveness. And it all kind of clicked together when I started situating that little kernel of a young married woman being involved with somebody else right around the time of the ending of World War II. And it expanded from there. And before long, I realized I was looking at a story that really was going to cover 4 to 5 decades. And I realized I was in for something more than just different than I had ever undertaken in my life, having been primarily a short story writer up till now.
Sure. You started talking, Patrick, about Ohio. My parents and my grandparents are also from small town Ohio. And I'd argue that Bonamy is a character itself in Buckeye. You describe it so richly in the novel. I know you even went so far as to sketch out a map of the town, which is part of the Barnes& Noble Book Club exclusive edition. Can you talk a bit about the importance of place in this novel and how you created it?
Yeah, I at first I thought, well, I'll try to use my father's hometown. And I tried that for about 5 minutes or a hot minute, as they say, because once I started looking up things, I realized I'm going to get so mired in the specific history of this town. And that's not
Mm.
what I was interested in. I was interested in the people in a town of a certain size. And the town I needed was actually bigger than the one that I'd started thinking about,
Hmm.
although Bonamy is pretty small. But I did want something that was, and to my mind, landlocked. I wanted something that had elements in it that I found exciting given my knowledge of the world. And one of the things was basements. I didn't realize until after I finished this novel that a lot of key scenes in this novel happen in basements.
Right.
Basements were something we didn't have in Florida. And as a little kid, I was so drawn to them. But with the town itself, I thought, nope, I have to make this up. This has to be a completely fictitious place, and then I don't have to adhere.
Mm.
However, that brings with it, of course, a whole new set of responsibilities because you have to make sure it feels real to you so that it can feel real, has a chance to feel real to the reader. I mean, the last thing you want is a reader being distracted thinking, I can't picture this place or I
Hmm.
don't know what this town is like. So even though it was fictitious, I think maybe about a year into this 8-year endeavor for this novel, I drew a map, and it was just for me, and it was just so that I could get some verisimilitude in my head and some consistency when I would just start thinking about where the bank that they used was in relation to the 2 grocery stores they had to choose from, in relation to where their jobs were. And if I had that in my head, where was the cemetery and where was the father-in-law who lived outside of town,
Hmm.
if I didn't have it written down, drawn out, it just felt willy-nilly to me, and then I worry that that would translate to the reader. So I drew this place, and at one time, it had street names and everything, and then I took the
Wow.
street names off just to clean it up for myself, and I made a cleaner version along the way. But that was up the whole time on my wall next to my desk. And it just made me feel comfortable in the invention. The
I
invention.
mean, it was so effective. It felt
Right.
like a real place.
Oh, thank you. I was so delighted that the map is in the Barnes and Noble edition. I get a kick out of that whenever I look at it.
I mean, the town really does feel like a character in the book, but speaking of characters, you have written some really wonderful ones. And I'm really curious, and some of our readers are curious, were some of these characters easier to write than others? Like, I'm really partial to Becky. I think she's one of the most interesting and complex characters in the book. She seems like she just kind of flowed out of you. So I'd love to know if some were easier to write than others, and also just a bit about where Becky herself came from.
Yeah, that's a great question. The only character that I sort of started thinking I had a little tiny handle on was Margaret. And that was because for about another hot minute, I thought, oh, I'll base Margaret on my grandmother. And then I realized I cannot do that because that just wasn't the person that I wanted to picture. And everybody else, I feel like when you write, you do sort of pull bits of clay from all these different parts of your life and pat them together and make your characters. So they're all these composites, but everybody else was um, purely invented, and she ended up being purely invented, and she ended up being the hardest one to write. Margaret was the
Mm.
hardest character for me to get a handle on because she's, to my thinking, she's a broken person. She's she doesn't come into the world with an adequate set of tools to deal with what awaits her, and she's incredibly selfish, and she doesn't have any investment in improving because she doesn't see the need. Like I don't want to get too deep into that, and I tried not to get too deep into it myself, but I just thought this is a broken person who's not ever going to get entirely fixed. And and the rest of them were by comparison easy. Becky, I love that you asked about Becky. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to give her an attribute that was out of left field, so to speak, that was most people would consider really unusual and that she took seriously. And I knew that I wanted that to be something that had to do with her believing that she could talk to the dead and or that she could hear from the dead. And and that was really fun and interesting to start with. And I thought of that the very first scene I wrote with her. I thought, what's going on with her? But then I really quickly came to this conclusion that while I wanted her to have this part of her, because her husband was never going to was going to have a very hard time taking it seriously, was going to look at her sideways for most of her life, and the people around her who love her most were going to look at her a little sideways, and that interested me, how she would respond to that. But I really quickly thought, I'm not going to set her up like this just to be made fun of for the whole novel. I'm not going to give her this ability that isn't real. And I didn't even know what that meant for the book, but I thought she can do it. So as anybody knows who's read the book, it's completely realistic otherwise. There's no fantastical element in the book whatsoever, except this one thing, which is this one character's belief and ability that she can talk to the dead. She doesn't understand it. She can't explain it, and I don't understand it, and I can't explain it. And I thought, I'm going to let that ride, because these are some of the mysteries that we live with. I do think that's a mystery that we all live with. I could say a little more about that. I don't want to go off a deep end on talking to spirits and whatnot. I really do feel like everybody has a little bit of experience with it. Everybody has a little bit of questioning in their mind, whether or not they admit it. And I wanted to tap into that. I did not know how big a part it was going to play in the book. I find there are certain things that happen in fiction that are, this is the way it works for me anyway. Some of it is because of my brilliant planning. Some of it is because of my wise ability to let go of that planning and change it. But then some of it is just luck, some of it just
Sure.
feels like luck. And when I got to this point where I thought, I mean, I knew everybody's arc from the whole time I was working on the book. I knew where everybody emotionally landed. I knew who was still going to be alive at the end of the book and who wasn't. So I knew what was going to happen to Skip. But it was well into maybe the second or third draft where I was inching toward writing an ending that I was happy with, that I thought, oh my gosh, all of this that's been going on with Becky is, in a way, preparation for the biggest challenge of her life. And when I realized that, I felt so overwhelmed and fortunate. Fortunate.
Mm.
I didn't plan that. I got lucky,
Hmm.
and I just ran with the luck. And it really did end up. It has not gotten it. The emotional impact of that for me, as the person who put it down on paper, has not worn off
Hmm.
all this time.
I love that so much. I actually do want to talk a little bit about Margaret because I have a really soft spot for her too. And something I'm really curious about, her whole life was shaped by being abandoned by her mother, and then she abandons her own child. Is that something that you knew was going to happen, or was that something that came to you as you were writing her?
I knew, well, at the very first, I didn't know quite how that would all fall out. I knew that they were going to be estranged,
Mm.
and I knew that that estrangement was going to start while Tom was still a boy. I didn't realize the dramatic. I didn't decide on the dramatic elements, the components of that, exactly the way it would fall out. But she is a character I think that people either love or just hate. And part of the fun for me and part of the interesting thing about writing fiction is that you can have your characters do unpleasant things or shocking things or horrific things even, and they should be unpleasant or shocking or horrific, and the reader should get to have any reaction they want to it.
Mm.
But the beautiful thing that fiction can do, if it's working well, is take the reader to that point with that character, so that by the time the character's doing that, the reader has a clear idea of what the character's thinking. And so it doesn't mean that the reader condones her leaving her child, of course. But the reader would understand, hopefully, when they get to that point, that in Margaret's mind, this was the only thing she had left to do. And this was the thing that was best for everybody. And and just to be in on her thinking, so that it all makes sense. And it's the same with later on in the novel with Felix, the other parent in that couple, and he makes this decision over and over again not to tell his son this really key piece of information about who his real father is, and why his mother, the whole picture about why his mother left, and not just that she just cut out on them. And that I found, just from hearing from some readers, people find that very frustrating. Like, how could he? How could he? But what I always come back with is, well, I'm not condoning it, but I think that how he could is in the book for a reader who wants to get there, who wants to receive it. So for me, like when I was writing that scene where Margaret is leaving, and oh gosh, I haven't even really relived some of how this fell out in my head, but now I'm just remembering. I didn't have that idea that Tom was going to come back while she was packing until I was in
Mm,
that scene. And I thought, what's missing? There's something punch here missing. The punch is that she has to see him. So he comes back and she's just misgauged time and he's home early or whatever. So there he is, and he sees she's filling up the car. She's about the garage door's up. Seems to be about to leave. He's sitting on his bike. I thought that was the punch, but no, the punch was that she doesn't look at him. She can't look him in the eye.
mhm.
To me, like that, I
Ooh,
still can't
ooh.
get over that. It's like, oh God, that was awful. Oh, but I totally could see why it was the only way she was going to be able to do it. If she looked him in the eye, she's thinking, I'm not going to be able to leave, and I have to leave. So it was a real challenge for me to get. I have to get really, really fond of my characters in order to write about them. And then when I get really fond of them, I feel this sense of responsibility
Mm,
to do right by them. And no matter what they need to do, no matter what they're going to do, I want to give them the fairest shake possible by at least showing the reader why they're doing it. So it was it was an emotional wallop for me, um, but I feel like that, and then the moment later in the book where the two of them come together again
mhm.
were two very hard things to write, but were hard by necessity. I think I would have been a little worried if they were easy to write, if those scenes just sort of flowed out.
Speaking of hard things to write and to read and understanding the characters, I want to talk a little bit about trauma. It shaped a lot of the characters. Obviously, Margaret's difficult childhood impacted her as a mother. Tom's childhood, even that scene you just talked about when Margaret leaves, impacts how he acts. Everett's experience in World War One, Felix being closeted, his loss of Augie, but each character reacts to that trauma differently. And you just kind of talked about like getting the reader to understand why these characters do what they do. Can you talk a little bit about what role that life trauma plays in the novel and why each character has such a different response, how they're all so different?
Yeah, I think the circumstances are different for each one of them. The kinds of traumas they're dealing with are different. The the kinds of ways that people didn't and don't talk about these traumas
Hmm.
is different. So nobody really had the same set of tools to use to help one another. And in Margaret's case, there she doesn't. She's ashamed of being abandoned by her mother. When I think any psychologist, psychiatrist, or probably any of us would say, honey, that wasn't your fault.
Right.
Be ashamed by that. But she feels a little bit of shame. It affects her sense of self-worth. And then the fact that she's, by one circumstance or another, she's not adopted. She's just fostered, but then
Mm,
returns. So she emerges into the world feeling traumatized by that. But she's not going to tell anybody about her past, so she's not even seeking any help with it.
right.
Felix's trauma, he was double whammy because he had the trauma of just being on a ship that was struck by a torpedo, and and being one of the handful of survivors of these people that he'd been traveling around with for several years, and losing, I can't necessarily say the great love of his life, but losing a love and losing a person that he first was seeing a possibility of, and not being able to discuss that, grieving and not being able to discuss his grief for, for a matter of the heart, for someone that he loved, is a different kind of trauma. And he actually, I feel like he makes an effort in his kind of fumbling way to deal with his trauma. And it is his efforts that open the book up in a way, because that brings him, with Bishop's help in a way, that brings him to Margaret, and going to Margaret cracks open his thinking about his life and where he is in it. And that cracks open how Margaret sees their marriage. And, it's a bit of a domino. And then with a character like Everett is part of that. He was in the First World War, and so he's part of this extended silent generation. But I really wanted with him a character who he might not want to talk about the war or his trauma with his son or his family, but he'll talk about it with his dog, and he'll rant about it to his dog, and he'll write letters to presidents he's never met, and political figures, because in a way, he is healthier than a lot of the people who just would not talk about what they'd been through at all, because he is, by going to DC and being one of the bonus marchers, and then by thinking about that, and by looking at the news and relating it to the things that he went through and the things that are going on currently in the book, that is a way of dealing with trauma. But I feel like a lot of the characters, it was a combination of not seeking help, not knowing how they could, not knowing how they could seek help, and the help just not being there. The help for soldiers returning from war who are having a hard time reacclimating. I don't feel like we've ever gotten a handle on that or been ready for that. And it seems to be a new problem at the end of each war, that the country is sort of figuring out how to handle. And from World War I, straight through Vietnam, it was a real hardship for people. And it wasn't just their PTSD. It was, so much else of their lives that was affected, but the trauma was just something they had to carry around on top of that.
Exactly. And just talking about that trauma and the choices the characters make, we just got a couple questions in the chat, and people were wondering, Margaret, there's one person in her life who does love Margaret, and it's Lydia early on, but Margaret makes a choice not to stay in touch with her. Can you talk about the decision to have Margaret make that choice? And then when Lydia dies, the grief over that. Just talk a little bit about that part of what that shows about Margaret's character.
I feel like what it tapped into for me was it was an extension in a bit of her being ashamed of who she is and where she came from. And she landed in this great marriage. And part of what's so difficult about her is that she just doesn't know how to be content. She doesn't know how to find happiness in whatever the situation is. All she can find is how this isn't measuring up to her expectations. And when she gets into her marriage with Felix, and she starts to keep up this relationship with Lydia, but I think at first it's just the temptation of secrecy. I feel like she learns early on, when she first gets to Columbus, before she meets Felix, she learns early on that she can withhold things from Lydia that might shock Lydia. That's like the white lie kind of, which is not writing letters saying I'm sleeping with this guy and this guy and this guy, and I'm having a great time.
Right.
She starts writing postcards because it takes there's less room, and she starts just saying very general things. And she gets that kind of gets into her psyche is, oh, I can withhold things and preserve a bit of myself and create an image. And so she starts doing it with, as you say, the one person who really loved her from the beginning and who she fully knows would love her no matter what.
Yep.
And then that it's kind of the nature of what I wanted to get to with secrets and time and withholding things from the people you love in this book is once you start doing it, if you don't come clean, it's not just that thing you're withholding. That's not just the transgression. The transgression is also the amount of time that you let go, and that you've let this stay buried. And it becomes a whole lot of decisions to lie, and not just one decision to lie. And she gets into that with Lydia to the point where she's so unhappy in her marriage. She doesn't know why they don't have a good sexual relationship. It 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 doesn't dawn on her because of where she came from and her background. It doesn't dawn on her what might be going on with Felix.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if she had written to Lydia, Lydia might very well have said, "Well, honey, maybe it was this." You know what I mean? Like
Right.
Lydia
Some
could,
sort of insight, someone to
yeah.
like bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, but she cannot reach out for help to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so she doesn't do it. And then she kind of squanders that as a resource in her life. She squanders what she had with Lydia. And I mean, it's in there that right when she just finally decides, I've got to call her now, I've got to get her back into my life because she is the one who wouldn't judge me for any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that. And that's when she dials, and that's when she finds out that it's too late.
Too
I
late.
had another somebody who's read everything I've ever published said you have a preoccupation with characters running out of time to do something important, even if it's small or big, and being worried about time. And I thought, oh, I do. I guess I do. I guess I do.
Yeah,
It was a rough spot. You know, it's rough when you get really fond of your characters and then you put them through some of this stuff. And if anybody's out there who hasn't read the book, there's also some funny stuff in this book. It's not a big sad fest, but there are some hard moments.
Yeah.
yeah, I would argue that a lot of the hard moments in this book come from secrets. I feel like secrets are kind of one of the biggest themes in Buckeye. Who has them, who keeps them, who reveals them, who doesn't. And I would even argue that some of the characters are keeping secrets from themselves. And so I'm really curious what made you interested in writing about secrets.
Without going into any specifics, and probably like most everybody else here today, I grew up with a lot of them.
Mm.
Some of them were mine. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer if you know that I'm gay. I was born in 1965, so I lived with a whole lot of secrets that were
Mm-hmm.
just circling around me that had no dramatic consequence except in my head, but they
Mm.
shaped who I was, and I
Sure.
was aware of that. And there were secrets in both generations, like both sets of grandparents, huge secrets that could not stay buried because what waters buried secrets? Time. And what else waters buried secrets? Wine. I I had I had a my aunt really started this whole book rolling for me just by a drunken conversation one night. And she's passed away as well, so I'm not really, knocking anybody who's going to be uh, shocked by this, but um, she let me in on a few things, and the more I would hear, and as a writer, I'm really fascinated. Like, okay, so what are the secrets in my family? Like, I'm the writer. I'm really curious, but then maybe people don't want to tell you because you're the writer in the family, and because you might write about it. But I want to say no, I don't even really want to use this stuff, but I'm interested in just the fact that it went on. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I found out that secret about my grandmother and this affair, again, I didn't care about that particular secret so much as I cared about the idea of how did this shape this person, this thing that she was not sharing with the people that
Mm-hmm.
she lived with. Um, how was how did it shape her, and then how did that shape her marriage in ways that her husband didn't even realize if he was unaware? If he was aware, what was that like? And was she aware he was aware? You know, so many different layers. And I thought this, what it really translates into is withholding information from the people you love and trust the most.
Mm-hmm.
And and again, time, if you add time to that, then it's not just the decision to withhold. It's a decision you're remaking again and again and again because you're deciding not to tell and not to tell and not to tell. It's not, you know, you can't say, oh, well, actually, 10 years ago, I decided not to tell you that. The reality is that I must have decided not to tell you that every single time it popped into my head in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. You,
And yeah,
you, you,
it was just how the withholding shapes a person really interests me.
You just set me up for our next question for you so perfectly, Patrick.
Okay.
Thank you. Time is also a really big element in this story. You know, this is a sweeping novel that takes us all the way from World War II to the early 1980s. And I think the way you play with time is really interesting. In some ways, the passage of time heals these wounds, and in others, like when Becky finds out about the affair years after the fact, the accrual of that time actually makes it much worse for her. And so I'm curious about, we talked a little bit about this. How did you play with time in this novel? Why is it so important to the storyline? Did you have the intention for this to be set over, several generations? It's such a big element of the story.
I did. I'll say two things about time. My comments about time can go into two different categories. One is just the structure of the book. It was my intention to write this book as chronologically as humanly possible in terms of the events. And I wasn't able to do that just because I couldn't find a great way to tell the story that didn't start with the moment Cal and Margaret met. Because if it didn't start with the moment they met and that occurred chronologically, then the reader was going to go around 200 pages before they got to that spot. And I didn't know what that story would be moving toward, or how the reader would sense that. So I did what I thought was very risky in that I tell the reader, hey, this happened, this thing happened. And then I say, let's back up and follow one of those characters through his life up till that moment. And then let's back up again to the other person through back to that moment. And then we'll move forward. There was no part of me that thought a good idea, like a strategic, catchy thing. I really thought that I'm just going to do this, and then whenever I start getting feedback from somebody, I'm going to be told, "Don't do it this way." But no one ever reacted that way. Everybody seemed to be on the same page with what I was going for. So, and then I knew that too with the structure of the book, that it was going to be a little lopsided because I'd say about more than half the book works us up to about 1945, 6, 7, into the early 50s. And then the last third of the book is all the rest of the years pushed forward. And that was just the way the story wanted to be. And
mm-hmm.
so I listened to that, and I had to get myself comfortable with, to me, that feels like it's imbalanced. Like
Mm,
I want the decades to kind of balance out and we spend time here and here. But in fiction, my gosh, for the sake of the story, for the sake of the reader, you've got to go on fast forward sometimes, push through spots. Um, the other thing that I would say about time is, yeah, it's incredibly fascinating to me. And everybody who's older, when I was younger, everybody who was older would say it speeds up. When the years go by, it starts speeding up. And I didn't hear it. I didn't believe it. We never hear it. We never believe it. And then one day you realize it's true. And then you realize it's truer and truer. And it goes faster and faster. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying because I feel like we're all here. Ideally, we all get our window of life, and we're supposed to do with it. We're supposed to do our best to become better versions of ourselves over the course of our lives in a way that positively affects the people around us. And I feel like, maybe with the exception of Margaret, who has a hard time grasping that fact, every character in the book is engaged in that. And every character in the book is walloped by the passage of time in one way or another. Even Tom, when he's really young, he's broadsided by the years that that have gone by where he did not know that he had a half brother.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't even that their lives might have played out differently, but just that was denied him. With Felix, he thinks he has all the time in the world, and then he realizes he doesn't have all the time in the world, and he probably needs to start addressing some things. And that's before he gets his medical diagnosis. And then when he gets his medical diagnosis, everything gets put into a new perspective. My favorite quote, this might sound like I'm going off on a tangent. My favorite quote in the world, I think, is by Voltaire. And it is, the most important decision you'll ever make is to be in a good mood. I love that.
I love that. I'm going to start telling my kids.
I try to tell myself that.
Myself, yes.
Yeah, because you just think, oh, and I'll tell you how this plugs into the book. The most important decision you will ever make is to be in a good mood, because it's the first decision before any other decision. If you decide that you're in a bad mood, then your day is
Forget it.
Yeah, just forget it. And we only get so many, and who knows how many we get. Each one of us gets a finite number. We have no way of knowing. My number could be up tomorrow. I have no idea. Do I really want to be in a bad mood today? I don't know. And what am I in a bad mood about, right? So the characters, I think, start to realize this, especially the ones who need to learn it, like Cal and Felix, as they get older. And there's this moment right near the end of the book that, when I wrote this, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't usually write this way. I don't usually write as if I'm just sort of pouring out my thoughts onto the page or typing them out. I usually just write a sentence, rewrite it, write it again, rewrite it, write the paragraph, print it, mark it up. I just mess with words. But when I got to this spot where Cal is sitting there right near the end, and he's thinking about what's important and what it means to get old, and how the passage of time plugs into your assessment of how you've lived your life. And I thought, yeah, what matters is the days, our days. That's what matters. I mean, it seems like such an obvious thing, but it's all we have. All we have are the days that we have to try to do something useful. And I know that everybody knows that, but I know it's so easy to forget it. And there was a moment in where Cal was just thinking about this, and I have to say, like, again, it's another moment where I just felt lucky, where I wrote that it's something like, old people don't live in the past lives in us. We have to get old to learn how to listen to it. And I remember writing that and thinking, yes, 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 yes. Like,
that's it.
Something's working. And then I thought, and what does it say? What does it say? And then I wrote, it says the days, the days, the days. And when I wrote that, I just got up from my desk and I went for a walk, because I thought, don't mess with it. don't mess with it.
I love that.
Resist your impulse to say, okay, good starting point. Now let's work that out. And I just left it alone. And the way it is in the book is the way it was when it first came out. But that is the whole thing about time is and Felix comes to this conclusion too. I'm forgetting the other big passage about time in the book is right before Felix dies.
Yep.
And he just starts thinking, oh my gosh, the way that we think about time is just so off base. All we should do is think that we want more.
Yep.
All we should want is just more. And all that ties together in my mind with what was going through Cal's mind. And I just figure if you did know that your time was up, you would want to be able to look back and see good days. You wouldn't want to look back and see, oh, wasted day, angry day, angry day, that day where I wallowed. You know. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the things we can control and how we measure our days. And there are so many wonderful acts of kindness and love in Buckeye. Skip defends Tom from bullies. Becky tells Everett she heard from his dead wife when he asked.
mm,
Felix brings Cal and Becky groceries. After Skip dies, how Cal and Becky care for Felix when he is ill. And this kind of ties into that, like how we measure our lives. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of kindness in the book and love?
yeah, I feel like I feel like it's hard to talk about without tapping into my philosophies of life.
I love it. Let's do it.
My philosophies of life are so simple. Kindness is so easy, and yet it's so easy to see it as something to put on one's to-do list for the day, like something
Ah,
don't forget to have a random act of kindness. Don't forget to be kind to people, don't forget to,
like another chore.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It shouldn't be.
And it shouldn't be, and it really is effective. I mean,
Mm.
we live in New York, like Manhattan. It is not on the surface the most chipper place to walk around. When you go through your day and just act kind toward everyone, almost everyone notices.
Mhm.
And perhaps they act kind towards someone else. Just paying it forward, paying it forward. It goes right back to the most important decision you're going to make. If you are going to be in a good mood, then you are leading with some form of gratitude. And I feel like in the book there are the characters who can lead with gratitude despite their struggles, and the characters who cannot. I say characters. Margaret may be the only character who absolutely cannot lead with gratitude. Um, Becky, I feel like, in a way, is the good heart of the book because
Mhm.
she doesn't have any secrets. She is the person who arguably should have the most secrets because she's got this thing going on that she knows nobody's going to understand. She's she's the person who's arguably the most unusual in the book, but she's the most comfortable in her own skin, and she's the most
Mhm.
comfortable with how she fits into the world, even though the world doesn't seem to have a place for her for much of the time. And so it's no kindness is no challenge for her. What is a challenge, as you just referenced, is when she actually lies to be kind
Mhm.
to her father-in-law, realizing and isn't that's really interesting to me. And I'm actually thinking about this for something else that this other idea I've been carrying around
Mhm.
is that phenomenon of it's not being cruel to be kind at all. It's
Mhm.
being deceptive to be kind,
Mhm.
uh, and actually handing somebody exactly what they want.
Or what they need.
Yeah, and what they need when it's not true. but you have the ability to make it seem like it is, and so you do it. Like, is that justifiable? I wonder if there's a reader out there who would say what Becky did with Everett is not justifiable. And I would welcome that,
Yeah.
But to my thinking, oh my gosh, no. Kindness often involves not saying what's on your freaking mind. Sharing is not always caring. Sharing,
Yeah.
sharing
Just
is
keep it to yourself.
yeah. Sharing is often a pain in the butt.
Mhm.
Sharing is a drag
Indeed.
at times. Let's have a little less sharing and a little more caring. A little more caring without the sharing.
Ah.
But yeah, kindness, I just feel like it's what everybody should learn, is how easy and necessary and vital it is, and how much it really does affect the day. And then to what degree do we learn it? And then to what degree do we need to relearn it and relearn it and relearn it? Because it's another thing that I am interested in as a writer, and I think the book touches on, is these things that come to us that we realize are true, but then we have to figure them out again and again.
And again.
Um, in that same way that Becky knows that if she's going to carry on with Cal, she has to forgive him. And she doesn't know how to do it. And then she talks to her mother. And that to me is a really key conversation in the book, even though it happens with a secondary character, where her mother-in-law tells her about basically that she knew that Becky's father was having an affair or having affairs, and she overlooked that. And she had to get to a point where she realized she couldn't forgive him, but she wasn't going to leave him. So what did that look like? And eventually that kind of looked like forgiveness. And that's okay. Like that was the message.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like, that might sound like she got a raw deal or that she had to bite the bullet, and she did, but
She chose it.
yeah, she chose it because what she wanted was to be married to this person that she built her life with. And I don't think it translates necessarily into the other person getting off the hook, because with Becky and Cal, it's not like Cal got off any hook. He put himself on the hook, and then she basically just said, all right, well, you're on this hook, but now what? And gave them, she gave the two of them all the time they needed to figure it out. Becky did, I feel like, but it took a lot of time.
Yeah.
And forgiveness too. This is another thing that I think is important to realize, is that forgiveness isn't always possible. Forgiveness is golden and it's important and it's vital to relationships, but it's not always possible. And I don't feel like Tom gives it to Margaret in that scene. To my thinking, he achieves it later himself. He gets to a point where he's able to forgive her past that last scene that they have. But in that scene, I don't think he gets it, and she doesn't receive it. And that's what she walks away. That's what she carries away from that, is not a neat bow on that situation whatsoever. That sometimes it's not possible.
You've set us up for our last big question for you. We are running on time, so I have two more questions for you. Brenda and I both did notice that mistakes and forgiveness really are a motif through the book, and you've talked some about this. I'm curious if you set out with a message about mistakes and forgiveness that you hope to convey, or is this something that kind of came out in the writing as you were getting to know these characters?
Oh, I I don't think about theme when I write. If I thought about theme, I wouldn't be able to write. In the same way where if I think too much about plot, I can't really write, because then I get caught up in getting it correct. But one of the themes in the book that emerged late is something that's really important to me, and it is a message I want the reader to carry away, which is that, well, it echoes what I was just saying a bit, that forgiveness is usually not just one decision or one act. That it's important to remember that it's really vital, and that it is sometimes an ongoing process. And then the other thing that I feel like at the heart of the book is a belief that we're defined by our good deeds in life, but we are also defined by what we do with our mistakes. And I feel like that's very, very important to our relationships because nobody's perfect. Very, very, very few of us, if any of us, are getting this right right off the bat and all the way through our lives. We make mistakes, and there has to be some forgiveness of that, and there has to be some assessment of our entire lives, our entire person, so that we're not defined by one single thing in a relationship. So that was a message I would want the reader to carry away. Yeah.
I love that so much. And you just took my final question out of my mouth, which was, we always ask this at the end, is there
Yep.
anything you'd like readers to take away from your novel? Is there anything else you want them to take away?
Oh yeah, I also want them to take away the undeniable urge to recommend this book to someone else.
Perfect answer.
Perfect. Incredible. Oh, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Dude,
This was such a wonderful conversation. It was such a joy to get to talk to you. And thank you to all of the book club readers who joined us today, who asked questions, who sent in questions through the Eventbrite. This is a reminder to join us again next month. We'll be discussing our October book club pick, which is Lily King's Heart the Lover. Patrick, thank you again. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for joining us. We're just such big fans of Buckeye and yours. So thank you
thank you,
very
Brenda and
much.
Lexie, and thank you everybody for joining in.
All right,
Thanks, Patrick.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.